Hello, everybody. A very good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening. Today, we'll be discussing about the Indian pharma sector in 2023. And I'm going to share with you 5 factors that will drive growth in the Indian pharma sector. But before that, let me introduce myself. I am Sanjay Shetgar, Vice President and Senior Consultant at NSF. I have been in the industry for about 30 odd years into pharmaceuticals of right from API intermediates manufacturing to drug product manufacturing and global quality management. So I handle various activities within the quality organization. And so today, what we'll be looking at will be something which is going to help us drive growth. But before that, let me just take a small amount of time from you to just give you a heads up on what is NSF, because many people, when we just say NSF, do ask me that what is NSF? Okay, let me give a very, very short thing so you know what we're talking about. So what's NSF? So we are NSF is an independent, not-for-profit, non-governmental and public health and safety organization. And our mission and focus has always been on protecting and improving human health. We keep bringing you various webinars, and also we support from a consultancy perspective. But what we are talking about today will be about the Indian pharma in the coming years. So let's first look at the Indian pharma. What is Indian pharma all about? I think it's important to note that Indian pharma is the third largest pharma industry in the world. It's the largest vaccine producer. It's the largest manufacturer and exporter of generic medicines. Highest number of US FDA compliant plants outside the USA. And it supplies over 50% of Africa's requirement for generics, nearly about 40% of generic demand in the US, and nearly about 25% of all medicines in the United Kingdom. And the revenue in India is expected to grow to about 65 billion by 2024 and about 130 billion by 2030. Right? So that's great position to be in. But then the industry, or not just Indian pharma industry, but all the industry has certain risk. Specifically speaking, from an Indian pharmaceutical point of view, the Indian pharma's biggest risk is in the area of supply chain and quality. These are the two main areas that we'll be looking at to see what can be done in this area in order to be prepared for the coming year. So the question that comes is that now that we are growing in this way, what is that companies are doing? Knowing fully well that there are supply chain or quality related issues that's probably going to hit us sometime or the other. How prepared are we? So the question on what do companies do? There are various scenarios that one can think about. One is just to sit back, allow things to move as they are going, and then hope for the best. The other is where companies have made giant leaps on the supply chain and the quality front, predominantly, which are reactive in nature. So that's where we are. Majority of the companies that have basically made sure that there are a lot of improvements done, but majority of them are in the direction of reactive actions that have been taken. Or the other way to look at it is that think about how we can protect the market share that it's there for India and then go beyond the targets. That's being proactive. So the change that we need to bring in is from reactive to proactive. It's not necessary that all of us are in the reactive zone. There are many companies who have moved in the direction of proactive and are probably somewhere in between. Or there are some companies who are proactive and then they see a lot of benefits that are coming. But always remember that the cost of quality, which can impact business, is huge. So as long as we are proactive, there is high chance or high probability that the cost of quality is going to be as small as possible. Our target should be to basically move towards the proactive zone and then in terms then help from an organization perspective by reducing the cost of quality. Right? So let's look at an ideal scenario. Now, what can be an ideal scenario? From a quality perspective, no product failures, no quality events. That's something that can be great, right? But yes, we could only achieve that if we had robust risk-based development, robust manufacturing processes, robust GMP processes, well-trained and educated staff, and of course, effective audits. But as we all know, it's not so simple. There are several variables. The technology transfer, the scale-up issues, facilities and equipment, the aging of them, availability of material, the supply chain that's related, issues that are surfacing which are not in our control, like the COVID or the pandemic that's hitting us, or maybe the war. And then, of course, the training and education point of view, that there will be some impacts either due to attrition, or it could also be because of the kind of opportunities that are coming in, the place where we are located, the kind of skill that is getting generated in those places. But finally, all said and done, we are humans, right? Mistakes are bound to occur, and we expect either the quality system to pick it up right there, or it's then left to the audits where we could pick it up and still address them, right? So let's look at the next scenario. Now, for all of these audits that we are talking about, even the US FDA is also undergoing an audit, right? Now, you have all heard of audits in the pharma world happening where US FDA comes and audits our sites. But do we know that even the US FDA organization is also audited? The US FDA was audited by the Office of the Inspector General, OIG, and a report was released to the public in June of 2022. Curious to know what the findings were? What do you think? So let's look at it. Right? Here are the OIG key findings. Let's go through them one by one. FDA did not always follow its policies and procedures throughout the foreign for-cause drug inspection process after the pragmatic changes. FDA did not follow its policies and procedures related to timelines of inspection, classification of inspection classification for 40% of the foreign for-cause drug inspections. FDA did not follow up its policies and procedures related to timelines of warning letters for 33% of the warning letters issued as a result of the inspections. However, FDA generally followed its policies and procedures relating timelines for regulatory meetings for 90% of the regulatory meetings resulting from foreign for-cause inspections. So that was a positive point from that point of view. A few more, let's look at that. FDA did not indicate in the establishment inspection reports whether an inspection was announced in accordance with its policies and procedures for 8 foreign for-cause drug inspections. FDA could not provide documentation to support that lead investigators completed required training before they conducted inspections. 2 lead investigators did not complete required training before they conducted the investigations. 6 lead investigators' training records did not include documentation showing that required training was completed. So what does it indicate? Right? So what it means is that there is a need for constant look at our systems and procedures and then make sure that they are under control. Even the FDA, although they are the so-called regulators from the audit perspective, they also have their own issues. They also have their problems, and there are audit findings there too. But it's very good to know that there is a process of auditing which kind of identifies these kind of issues so that they are addressed. And I understand that FDA has given a indication with regard to how they are going to address these findings, and due to that, we will see in this coming 2 years not many audits happening too. Right? So let's now look at what is the status at the company's side. Right? So we do have a number of audits. In any pharmaceutical company, I'm sure all of you have a number of audits. Regulatory audits, customer audits, regulatory audits from various countries, and then there are some so-called due diligence audits, and then internal audits and so on. So several audits that we go through. And there are final outcomes. I'm sure all of you must be analyzing those final outcomes of audits. Is there anything new that you find in these audits? You will realize that, oh, they are the same old observations that we have seen. Whether you look at the observations that are there in the FDA organization itself, or observations that we see out of the 483s or the warning letters, they are the same old ones. It's just that they appear in different forms depending on the type of the organization. So what is that which is happening? So it's important to introspect and search for these answers on why the same kind of issues show up in different ways. Right? The million-dollar question always is, what went wrong? I'm sure the management asked that question after an audit which has not gone pretty well on what went wrong. Why did we land up in a situation of this nature? If you're really serious about this, one of the things that I would say is stay away from a blame game. If you're really looking at trying to address these issues and then bring about serious changes which are sustainable. I'm sure all of us want to be in that scenario where we are able to address the issues in a manner that when audits come, we consider it as free consultancy, wherein someone comes and provides guidance or finds gaps for us, and then we finally make an action around it. One very important thing to note is that there is a huge backlog of audits with the US FDA due to COVID restrictions. So as expected in the coming years, the audits are going to get ramped up in the India and China region. Due to some restrictions in China, it was slightly less, but India, the audits already started. And India is going to see a surge in the audits in the year 2023. So before we look at what needs to be done, let's look at the Indian industry trends in the last 3 years. These are US FDA inspection trends in India. Please note that these numbers that I have indicated over here are only for the Indian companies, and they are only what I have considered is only the drug category kind of audits that have been carried out. So if you look at the 3 years of 2020, 21, and 22, clearly you can see that 21 and 22, the number of inspections that have occurred pretty less, right? That's kind of expected with the kind of restrictions and movements that were there. But in whatever data that I'm presenting for 2022 is the data that's available at the FDA websites at this point of time. And there are probably several audits that have got conducted, and the outcomes may not have been reported as of now. So what you can see is that in 2020, there were nearly 100 odd inspections that were carried out. And then more or less about 41 to 54 of the inspections went well, right? So it's nearly 95 inspections actually went well. It's only the 6 that had OAI issues. But when you look at 2021, of the 14 inspections that occurred in the drug category area, 4 of them had OAI issues. And in 2022, there are no such OAI issues reported as of now. So that's a kind of a trend that is showing up in terms of the number of inspections and their outcomes at this point of time. Let us also look at what are the kind and category of observations that we are seeing. So here are the top 5 category of observations that we have seen in the last 3 years. These are not listed in any particular order, so they are randomly listed over here. For example, the first category is with regard to the organization and personnel, which is the subpart B of the CFR. And the major issues there are with regard to the responsibilities of the QC unit, personal qualification related issues. Similarly, the second category is on records and reports under subpart J. And here we find a lot of observations related to investigations, production records, batch records review, laboratory records, a lot related to investigations. I'm sure all of you are aware that several investigation findings or the manner in which the investigation has been conducted, not finding the root cause and trying to put a corrective action and preventive action in place. So there are several findings that are coming up in that category. The third category is the laboratory records. And most of these findings in laboratory records are related to the general requirements, stability testing, and testing for release for distribution purpose. The fourth category is the production and process controls as a part of subpart F. And the observations are mainly with regard to written procedures not being followed, potential microbial contaminations, issues with regard to sampling and testing from the statistical sampling point of view, or trying to make this sample representative. And the fifth category of observations are with relate to the equipment, and the observations are there on even on automatic equipments, mechanical equipments, all electronic equipments. So what basically we are saying is that it's not that just we move from mechanical to automatic equipment and we think that the issues are resolved, but it is not so. There is the amount of complexity that gets built up when you move to automatic equipments. That complexity has to be addressed in some form. And that complexity is mainly with regard to understanding what is the output that is thrown out from the instruments that we are using, instruments or even equipments that we are using. So that output, it's important that they are analyzed and then we act based on the outputs that are thrown out. Right? So let's see the next slide. As you see that the Indian pharma expects high growth during this period in the coming years, there are a significant amount of approvals and new filings lined up, especially in the biopharmaceutical field. We also know that in the past, quality culture saw a huge push from the US FDA perspective. A more holistic approach is now coming out with the quality maturity model, the QMM model. And it's time that companies start understanding and integrating the QMM requirements strategically to gain distinct advantage. So in terms of the growth factors, let's look at the 5 factors that are going to help the industry and will be the growth influencers in order to get sustainable outcomes. So the factor 1 is the proactive quality management system. We'll talk about this in the subsequent slides, but that's where we need to be, or at least we need to progress towards that if we are still in the reactive zone. The second one is the robust GMP processes. Factor 3, audits and compliance. Effective audits basically. That's what one has to be looking at. Factor 4, agile regulatory processes. It's important that the manufacturing, the strategy that is built up as a part of any organization is well supported through the quality and regulatory processes. And then the 5th factor, and a very important factor, is the training and education. One thing to note is that as part of the quality maturity model, driving the quality culture across the organization is of high importance. As you may realize, when you talk about quality maturity model, there are 3 large aspects of it. The first one is the quality management system itself. The second one is the product quality, and then, of course, the process quality. Right? And quality culture is inbuilt within this in order to drive the growth influencers that we are talking about today. And it's extremely important as we progress further that the quality culture within the organization has to be such that it gets recognized by FDA as well as any other suppliers or customers that we have. So let's look at the proactive quality management system. I've just tried to depict the proactive quality management system under these four buckets of quality planning, application, quality metric and continual improvement, and senior management review. The fact that I've indicated the annual quality planning over here is with the intention that every organization will have a 5-year plan or a 7-year plan around the complete strategy of manufacturing. It's important that quality is not left off within that 5-year planning process. Quality, just like any other department, has to be a part of the entire organization planning itself, right? So what we are just looking at this point of time, considering the next year, is that what is that we had targeted for? And how are we progressing to make sure that we are reaching the objectives that are laid down as a part of our annual quality planning? The next aspect over there is the application of quality risk management. Now, whatever strategic planning has been done, now we just can't just go ahead and implement them. So it's important that we apply quality risk management appropriately according to the risk associated with it, and then have our systems, procedures, and product development processes. And then there is a layer of quality metric and continual improvement that one has to look at to check and measure whether we are moving in the right directions or not. And finally, I say it's a senior management review because finally, if that review is done appropriately and we are able to identify the actions being taken, then the message that gets sent across the organization is that there is a push towards making sure that whatever we plan for quality is really happening. And the senior management is ensuring that by making sure that management reviews are conducted in a timely manner. In all of this, quality culture is the one binding factor that drives this. So this review cannot be just meant or done by a quality head, maybe, right? It has to be a total review by the senior management, which comprises of quality, manufacturing, overall site heads, in some cases, even the organization leads, right? Always remember, the cost of cleaning up a reactive system or a system which is so-called hybrid is always much larger than a proactive system. So let's look at each of these elements in a slightly more detailed form. When you talk about proactive nature, there is this annual risk-based quality planning, which is embedded within the organization, driving the quality behavior. The fact that it is embedded within the organization demonstrates that there is a quality behavior right from the top, right? So it kind of gets taken right to the grassroots level. It's important while these quality plans are put into place to be aware of the environment around us, both the internal environment and the external environment, so that adequate corrections can be done where necessary. It's also important for being aware of the risks and the mitigation measures and revisit where necessary. Sometimes as a part of the development process, or it could be a part of the manufacturing strategy, there are certain risks that are taken and we have some mitigating measures around it. It's important to know whether these mitigation measures are still good enough, or is there the risk itself has changed. And that's the reason why the revisit of all the risk is extremely important. Developing a plan or a pathway for quality maturity. As I've just started in the beginning, that one scenario could be just sit back and relax. The other one is always trying to look at how we can improve ourselves in order to move towards the proactive nature and be a mature organization. Finally, if you all realize that FDA is already moving towards that direction, and the June 2022 guidance and the projects that have been initiated from a quality maturity model indicate that companies who actually evolve and then live up to the quality maturity model are going to be benefited in the end. There will be some benefits, whether it is reduced number of audits, faster approvals, or priority approvals or priority reviews. It could be anything. So there is something for the industry to look at and see, okay, how can we be there on that path? I understand that we can't just at a click of a button move our maturity from one place to another, but it's a journey and we need to start it. If not started, we need to start it immediately. And then, of course, there are time frame and follow-up reviews from right at the senior most level, just to make sure that we are not slipping. Let's look at the second element which impacts the proactive quality management system. And that is with regard to the application of quality risk management. Again, I would like to highlight, remember, it's not a one-time exercise. You need to revisit this periodically, identifying areas and documenting the risk management actions. Many times we tend to do the risk calculation in our minds, but probably don't document it appropriately. It's important that we document that, and along with the basis, a scientific basis of why we want to say whether the risk is low, medium, or high. Also, it's important to keep things simple. The reactive approach often leads to disturbing the simple nature of the SOPs or systems or processes. And we need to dive deep depending on when the complexity is high. It's just to make sure that whatever resources are available are adequately used so that the maximum efforts are put on areas which are complex and not try to use the so-called skilled labor or skilled type of elements in an area which are simple or just have no impact or very low impact. So as complexity increases, we need to develop mitigation plans, which could also mean moving towards digitization, automation, and again, re-emphasizing the risk register is a live document, and we need to keep it updated at all times. On the quality metric and continual improvement, we need to develop metric in order to improve based on gap assessments, and this has to be measurable. It's quite possible that the metric may not necessarily always be the same for all organizations. Depending on which area you are trying to look at, it's important to make a measurement over there and then make an improvement and then move to the next, depending on how you use your resources. So that's where data trending and analysis comes in, right? Product data, as well as any relevant quality health metric, would help when you're looking at areas that you want to improve. It's important to look at patterns developing out of this data and then use simple tools like PDCA cycle, document your assessments, and then move towards the improvement cycle of continual improvement. While continual improvement is one of the asks from the regulators, it's also important for us from an industry perspective. There are new technologies coming in which are much more effective from the aspect of scalability or from the aspect of potential errors that it can generate, and also from the efficiencies point of view. And last and foremost, we need to be aware of the new regulations. A lot of regulations are coming in. It's important for us to be aware of both the statutory and the non-statutory changes that are happening around us, and making sure that there is a plan of action for all of them. Sometimes we may say, oh, this is something which probably doesn't impact us immediately. But then the question would be that, what do we do? Instead of waiting for it to hit us, is there something that we can do so that the behavior within the organization for that kind of an event or an activity starts, and then we are in a much better shape when the actual regulations come into play. For example, the QMM approach of FDA, right? So this is going to come in, no doubt about that, but it's important that companies start working around that. Senior management review. This is probably the most cited from the review perspective. When I say involvement of senior management reviews, it's more to make sure that you demonstrate to the entire organization that you're serious about quality, and then actions get taken, and the required resources or required actions that are being taken. You can also check whether the improvements are happening, and if improvements are not happening, there are ways to see whether what else can be done in order to improve them. So those are the metrics that we could look at as a part of senior management review, whether it is process health, product health, or even some other site health related matrices. And at the same time, become aware of the key changes that are happening from the regulatory and environment front, and how is the organization stepping up to be aware of that. Whether it was the nitrosamine cases that were observed and the extension of nitrosamine cases that came in. So it's all something which was there in the setup. A lot of regulations came in, but it is important that organizations are able to kind of understand that and make attempts to get them rectified. You would be surprised that while you may say that now the industry is aware of nitrosamine impurities and so on, but there are still many companies that get cited for it. So again, a question for each one of us to think is that what is that we are doing, how we are doing it, and is it something that we are doing is sustainable? And as a part of senior management review, it's extremely important to review and look at audits and its trends. What are the kind of findings coming in? How can we make the auditing system strong so that you are able to identify issues upfront rather than through the regulatory process? The second contributing factor from a growth perspective is the robust GMP processes, right? As we were talking about, what can we do so that we don't have any failures of product, or failures due to human errors, or failures due to people not doing things. Now, there are a couple of them that are there. So the product and analytical robustness is one of the key requirements which controls majority of the issues that happen at the plant, right? So it's important the quality by design principles are applied, and for all products, the critical attributes of quality, material, and process are known. And for the failure modes, you know what is to be done, and there are mitigation measures that are available so that product doesn't move towards a failure mode, right? So it's important to exercise that and make sure that at no point of time you have failures coming in. Now, this is true both from the product point of view as well as from the analytical testing point of view, right? I'm sure you realize that an OS can cause the amount of stress in the organization. At the same point of time, the amount of time that is spent in investigating and trying to find out what could be the reason for it, right? The second aspect is the risk of contaminants. And if both internal as well as external, and if this risk of contaminants is known upfront as a part of review by quality by design, there is high possibility that we would be able to be aware of all the potential possibilities that are there of what can come and impact us. Okay, and then based on risk, if we can then categorize them and see where you need to put the maximum energy. Defining the control strategy, I think with all the product and analytical robustness issues that are there, it's very important that a control strategy is defined so that the operations and the routine manufacturing, testing, and distribution happens without any issues. Setting specifications, understanding the variability of the process, and choosing the right methods for testing. Product transfers, knowledge transfers, especially during the transfer process, extremely important so that there's a good handshake between the plant and the R&D organizations. The whole idea is to develop with an intent to reduce human mistakes during routine manufacturing, right? Because if human mistakes occur, then a lot many questions get raised. And today, human errors are being looked at in a very, very different way. As you may realize that several times there are companies who may cite a human error and just close it out with a training. Today, it is just not accepted. And very important is also to look at all the legacy products and the older equipment. It's important that they continue to deliver. At the same time, if there are need for any changes on the legacy product sides or on the equipments which are pretty old, then are there some controls that are being exercised so that the current GMP requirements are ensured? On the digitization and automation front, it's important to have a clear policy and a roadmap, especially from a paperless to hybrid options. Most of the time, the issue surfaces over there when you are in a hybrid environment and no clear policies are available. That's when sometimes your SOPs may actually be contradicting each other. Duplication issues, clear distinction between what is raw data and which raw data would be relied at. Those are the kind of questions that have been coming up in the recent inspections. We always say on the digitizing and automation front, yes, we need to have simplified processes. But at the same time, one of the points to note is that when you want to get into the automation front, don't try to just mimic the paper process. Look at it separately. Identifying repetitive processes and automating based on criticality is a good way to look at it. And then, of course, the controls on the data integrity elements and the audit trail. Because every time you move toward automation, the elements of data integrity and audit trail also become important, and they need to be addressed in the same way. The third element is the key GMP systems and procedures. I listed down the few of them which are really going to make a difference, especially with regard to the facility and equipment management systems, looking at aging facilities, looking at predictive maintenance rather than a breakdown maintenance, process and cleaning validation, statistically significant sampling, finding out using this PDE approach for residues, cross-contamination strategies, investigative processes, change management, CAPA management, batch record, analytical record systems, and management reviews. Pay attention to these systems as written systems. Once it is available, then it's important that what is written is followed exactly to that level, right? So the next element is the agile regulatory management. So the product filing strategies are of extreme important. It's important that we make a proper strategy when you're filing a product, especially from a market perspective. And when you do market extensions, finally, we can see how we can avoid some of the repetitions over there. A structured approach, a checklist-based phase gate reviews, or upfront risk mitigation measures help in order to make sure that there is a plan against the product, and then depending on the kind of markets that we are looking at, we can develop all the potential related gaps that may arise over a period of time. The dossier filing strategy is kind of interlinked with the product filing strategy. And here, the importance is with regard to the review and planning of potential queries that may come up. So it's important to be aware that once we have made the product ready, what could be the potential queries that may come from the reviewers? And how do we address them just to make sure that they are responded to quickly and we don't lose the time? Then there are potential changes that you may be aware of which could occur in the coming months. So how do you plan for that upfront by putting a dossier in such a way that we don't have to reapply for a change to a larger extent? Right? To some places we may not be able to avoid that, but if we are very clear that in 1 year down the line, we need to make the change of a manufacturing equipment because of the kind of sales that are expected, then it's better to be prepared for it and address that, or at least start preparing for that quickly so that we don't lose much time around it. Initiating studies considering risk and or an area where there is a timeline challenges. It's like many times what happens is that when you plan a product, you know that there is a potential risk area, although you have mitigated them, but you still want to do something as a part of the mitigation measure. So it's much better to have a plan for that and start some of the activities rather than wait for the observation to come. And then, of course, the most important, the response to the regulatory deficiencies. It has to be structured enough so that it can be addressed timely. Third is the regulatory maintenance. This is more to do from a timing perspective, at the same time making sure the changes that are happening in the manufacturing setup are addressed in a timely manner. So there should not be a situation where we have changes being implemented, whereas the filing is delayed for whatever reasons. So it's important to keep the time part of it addressed. The fourth element is compliance and audits. And here we need to be aware of all the current regulatory requirements and its interpretations. It's important how the regulator looks at it while applying it to our business. It's also important that we develop simple and written policies or procedures which address the regulatory requirements, but at the same time keep them current. As I was mentioning earlier, that in the reactive approach, we tend to make changes which have impact on the procedures, and then over a period of time, they become complex enough, and that's where the genesis of the problem comes in. Conducting gap assessment at periodic intervals, prioritizing changes and the risk areas is another way to make sure that we constantly look for changes that have happened and then address the gaps that creep in over a period of time. And supporting this with a good CAPA program is one of the things that one must be looking at. Risk-based audit planning. Many times we see companies perform their internal audits, and you find them, they are the standard department audits that happens. It's the same number of days, happens at a regular time, finishes off within 1 day or whatever the time period is there. And then we have observations that come in those areas. So it's important that these audits, which are done internally, are also risk-based. And then you identify areas where there are issues and then work on them in order to make sure that each of these areas gets addressed. Not looking department by department, but trying to probably look from a specific activity point of view. There are high chances that you may pick a defect if there is something when you're looking with that kind of depth. The supplier assurance program, it's a serious requirement, and with the current kind of scenarios that are developing, it's extremely important that this program is very robust. Not just for the raw and packaging materials, but also the other miscellaneous items that come in contact with the product, or even services that we take from external agencies. Finally, these periodic audits are audits where we should always do it with some kind of a new pair of eyes. Now, why I state that is that if it is the same person doing it again and again, over a period of time, he starts seeing it as routine or something that is seen but not really realized by him at all. Right? So this happens when you're going to your office on the same route every day. You probably don't remember that if there's something new that has happened on the way when I came in. Right? So it's something similar to that. It makes sense to kind of employ a new pair of eyes from time to time, changing the areas and then trying to look with a different set of eyes and say, okay, what's that we have not identified in the past? Of course, in all these audits, do not assume. And that's something I think as an auditor, everyone is taught that you need to look at facts and evidences rather than assumptions to say that, oh, that must be there. So we need to have evidences in place. I'm sure many times companies do indicate that the observations that are picked internally are just the standard documentation issues, errors in writing or reason not mentioned. So it's like the indication is that they are the low-hanging points which come up. So that's something for us to probably look at when you do your audits. That what are you looking at? Are you looking at with the same kind of checklist every time, or is there a need for you to review that? So the way of auditing, the manner in which the audit is carried out, it's important that we kind of look at how audits are done and if necessary, supplement them, train them in order to do the audits appropriately. The FDA 483s provide a significant insight on how audit regulators look at the requirements. Its interpretation, especially when you look at the same kind of observation in two different companies, so you'll find it the manner in which it is written, it could be entirely different. So it's important to take a view out of that 483s and not try to just take it on its face value and implement corrective measures in your companies. So look at the points holistically and then address them rather than on a reactive way. Certified auditors, there are ways in which you can make sure that the audits happen through certified auditors so that the elements of auditing are addressed and they take care of that during that process, and we are able to get observations which are meaningful and they get corrected. The last factor is education and training. Now, education and training is something which is very widely used, sometimes interchangeably. But we need to be aware that we educate for knowledge and we train for skills. So it's important that is understood whenever we do training sessions or education sessions. So it's important the how factor or the why factor is addressed. Education and training is like a key which we need to unlock the quality management system if we really want to move up the quality maturity model. It all depends on how you manage this piece well in order to see where you can be in the QMM process. So my suggestions are to revisit the education and training process, identify the gaps, and also document and eliminate the errors that are associated with it. Identify what kind of training works for your team. Understand the needs of the team members, and then try to keep it simple as possible. Address how error investigations are handled when it comes to human errors. Make sure that the human error doesn't get converted into just a training. Focus on changing the behaviors, because that is going to help us. That is going to address it systematically. And most important, coach and mentor at all levels. It's not just sufficient if it is just at a doer level. It's important that the coaching as well as the mentorship process is required to be there at every layer in the organization. So for someone who still wants to know more, visit our knowledge library. It has 200 plus articles and videos for health, wide ranges of issues that are there, and they are updated regularly based on regulatory changes by our experts. You can always follow us on LinkedIn for latest resources, including articles from NSF experts, regulatory updates, and also to know about some of the free webinars and topics that are of interest to you, and any updates that are there from the NSF services that we have, and the regulatory, the events and training courses that happen from time to time. I think that's all from me. Wish you all the best to get into the new year in the coming 3 or 4 months and be prepared for regulatory audits. I'm sure these 5 factors will help you to improve your business. Any questions?